I'm 81 years old. Back in late September, long after the worst of the Arizona summer heat had supposedly broken, I woke up at 3 in the morning completely convinced that the air conditioning unit on my roof had finally failed. I threw off the sheet, swung my legs out of bed, and the cold air in the hallway hit my chest like a wet towel. The air conditioning was working perfectly. The digital thermostat on the wall read exactly 72 degrees, exactly where I have left it every night for the past 5 years. The heat was entirely my own. My cotton pajama shirt was clinging to my shoulders, dark and damp with sweat. I sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, trying to figure out if I had just woken up from a bad dream that I couldn't remember. When you reach your 70s and 80s, you get very good at making excuses for the strange things your body does in the middle of the night. You blame a heavy dinner you ate too late in the evening. You blame the lingering heat of the desert trying to push its way through the drywall. When Margaret was alive, she was always cold, and we used to keep a heavy quilt on the bed even in the spring. I got so used to sleeping under all that weight over the decades that my first thought was simply that my internal thermostat was confused. I got up, changed my shirt, drank a glass of tap water, and went back to sleep. I didn't give it another serious thought until it happened again 4 days later. And then twice the week after that, I wasn't just getting a little warm, I was waking up completely drenched, as if I had just finished walking 3 miles in the afternoon sun, my heart beating with a strange, heavy, deliberate rhythm against my ribs. The most confusing part of the whole ordeal was what happened every single morning at exactly 8 o'clock. Like a lot of men my age, I have a very strict, unbending morning routine. Coffee, the morning paper, and the blood pressure cuff sitting on the kitchen table. Every morning I would wrap that gray cuff around my left arm, press the blue button, listen to the motor hum, and wait for the numbers to flash on the screen. Every single morning they were practically perfect. 120 over 78, 118 over 80. I would write them down in my little spiral notebook with my date and time, and I would feel a quiet sense of pride. I thought I had my cardiovascular system completely under control. I thought my engine was running perfectly. I had absolutely no idea that my morning numbers were essentially lying to me by omission. I spent the majority of my working life in community health education back in Ohio, trying to teach working folks how to understand the basic mechanics of their own bodies. I would talk to men who spent their entire lives working the assembly lines at the automotive plants. They understood perfectly well that a piece of heavy machinery that runs 24 hours a day without a cool-down cycle will burn out its bearings twice as fast. But they had a terrible time applying that exact same factory logic to their own chests. I realized sitting at my kitchen table that I was doing the exact same thing. When the physical evidence of the sweating didn't match the perfect numbers on my gauge, I chose to trust the gauge. But the gauge was only telling me half the story. The sweating wasn't a forgotten nightmare, and it certainly wasn't the blankets. It was a mechanical failure in the timing of my system, and it took a conversation with my doctor to finally understand what was happening to my machinery while I was unconscious. I went in for a standard checkup in November and mentioned the night sweats as an afterthought, just as I was putting my jacket on to leave the examination room. I told him I thought I might be coming down with some kind of low-grade seasonal virus that only flared up in the dark. He stopped writing in his chart, took his glasses off, asked me to sit back down, and started asking me very specific questions about my sleep. He wasn't interested in my lungs or my throat or my temperature. He was entirely focused on my heart. He looked at my little spiral notebook full of perfect morning blood pressure readings, tapped the page with his pen, and told me that those numbers were nothing more than a snapshot of a stationary vehicle. They told him absolutely nothing about what the engine was doing at 3 in the morning. He explained a biological process to me that completely shifted how I view the maintenance of the human body. In a healthy cardiovascular system, your blood pressure is not supposed to stay the same 24 hours a day. When you go to sleep, your body is supposed to deliberately power down. The medical community calls it dipping. Your blood pressure should drop by 10 to 20% during the night. It is the only time your heart, your arteries, and your entire internal plumbing system get to truly rest. The physical pressure against the pipe walls relaxes. The machinery cools off. But as we get older and as our arteries get a little stiffer from decades of use, that natural automatic shutdown process often stops working. My son Daniel, the physical therapist up in Denver, explained it to me a few weeks later using a metaphor that made perfect, concrete sense. He said, "Dad, imagine a massive industrial boiler room in the basement of a factory. At the end of the shift, the night watchman is supposed to turn the pressure valves down so the pipes can cool overnight and the metal can contract. But if the watchman falls asleep at the switch, the boiler keeps firing at full capacity in an empty building. The pipes stay incredibly hot. The pressure builds up in the dark. That is exactly what nocturnal hypertension is. Your body is resting quietly in bed, but your cardiovascular system is still running at highway speeds. And that is exactly where the sweating comes into the picture. When your blood pressure refuses to drop at night, your sympathetic nervous system, the part of you responsible for your fight or flight response, stays fully activated. Your body physically believes it is under active stress. It is pumping blood against high resistance, working absolute overtime while you are trying to sleep. That massive internal effort generates physical heat. Your body breaks out in a sweat to try and cool down an engine that is fundamentally overheating. You aren't sweating because the room is too warm or because the quilt is too heavy. You are sweating because your heart is running a marathon while your head is resting on the pillow. This is the part that truly sobered me up and changed my perspective on the whole situation. For years, the medical community and folks in my line of work thought that your daytime blood pressure was the most important number to watch. We focused all our energy on the daytime readings, but recent evidence has completely flipped that understanding. It turns out that your nighttime blood pressure is actually a much stronger, much more accurate predictor of a future stroke or a catastrophic heart attack. If your pipes never get a chance to relax, the constant 24-hour physical stress wears down the delicate inner lining of your arteries at a highly accelerated rate. You are essentially eroding your own foundation in your sleep. And the most dangerous, insidious part of this condition is that you can wake up, take your morning medication, check your pressure while drinking your coffee, see a perfect reassuring number, and never realize that you spent the last 8 hours living in the danger zone. The gauge lies to you because you are only checking it when the engine is idling in the driveway. My doctor didn't just guess at a diagnosis. He sent me home with a 24-hour blood pressure monitor. It was a small, cumbersome device I wore on my belt, attached to a cuff that automatically inflated every 30 minutes, even while I slept. I wore it for a full day and night. When I brought the machine back and he downloaded the data into his computer, the truth was right there on the screen in black and white. At 8 in the morning, my pressure was a beautiful 120/80. But at 3 in the morning, right around the time I was waking up drenched in sweat and checking the thermostat, my pressure was spiking up to 155/95. My plumbing was under immense, dangerous strain exactly when it was supposed to be healing itself. The solution to this problem was surprisingly simple, but it is something most folks my age never think to ask their doctors about. We didn't add more medication to my daily list. We didn't try any radical new treatments. We just changed the schedule of the maintenance. For years, I had been taking my single blood pressure pill right after breakfast, out of sheer unthinking habit. It was just part of the morning routine. My doctor simply told me to move that exact same pill to the evening, right after I finished my dinner. By shifting the timing by 12 hours, the medication reached its absolute peak effectiveness exactly when my body was struggling to lower the pressure on its own. We gave the factory foreman a tool to actually turn the boiler down at night. We gave the engine permission to cool off. It took about 2 weeks for my body to fully adjust to the new rhythm, and for the medication to build a new cycle in my system. I remember very clearly the first morning I woke up and realized the sheets were completely dry. I hadn't woken up at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling. I hadn't felt my heart pounding heavily against the mattress. The engine had finally been allowed to cool down. The medication was doing its heavy lifting in the dark, relieving the physical pressure on the pipes and letting the entire system genuinely rest. It was a profound relief, not just physically, but mentally, knowing I wasn't doing invisible damage to my own house while I slept. I am telling you this story today because I know for a fact that there are millions of older adults out there waking up in the middle of the night, wiping sweat from their foreheads, and blaming the weather or their blankets, or simply the inescapable strangeness of growing older. They are getting out of bed, taking their blood pressure in the bright morning light, writing down a good, safe number, and walking away feeling perfectly protected. They do not know that their gauge is lying to them. They do not know that their heart is begging for a break that never comes. If you are consistently waking up hot, if your chest feels heavy in the middle of the night, or if you find yourself sweating when the room is perfectly cool, do not brush it off as a meaningless inconvenience. Do not just buy a thinner pair of pajamas or turn the ceiling fan on high and hope it goes away. Your body does not waste energy sending you random, meaningless signals. If the engine is running hot in the middle of the night, there is a mechanical reason for it. You still have the time and the authority to protect your foundation. You still have the ability to change the way your machinery operates. Call your doctor this week. Tell them exactly what happens to you in the dark. Ask them plainly if it might be time to look at your numbers when you aren't awake to write them down. The independence we all desperately want to hold on to is protected by paying attention to the small, quiet things we would much rather ignore. Take care of yourself this week. I'll see you next time.